feminine presence in her raw, unfiltered form does not merely appear in the external world as a woman of flesh and blood. She emerges from the deepest chambers of a man's unconscious as a psychological force, mysterious, compelling, and often disorienting. This internal figure, long mythologized in dreams and myths, is the Anima, the inner feminine archetype. She is not simply a fantasy or a shadow of one's mother or lover. She is the soul image, the psychic bridge to the unconscious. And her seduction is not of the body alone. It is of the soul, the will, the very center of masculine resolve. When a man embarks on the path of discipline, semen retention being one such path, he is, in essence, attempting to reclaim the scattered pieces of his masculine essence. He withdraws his energy from the external world and turns inward toward the self. But this turning inward provokes a reaction from the unconscious. The Anima, long accustomed to ruling him from behind the curtain of his instincts, now begins to resist. Her resistance does not come with swords or screams. It comes in whispers, sighs, fantasies. She appears in the eyes of a woman passing by, in the scent of perfume, in the late-night text, in the dream that lingers long after waking. It is never direct. It is always symbolic. The Anima knows precisely how to capture attention. She doesn't confront the rational mind. She seduces it. She draws it downward, inward into longing. Not the longing for union with the eternal feminine, but the hunger for distraction, gratification, escape. In the man who is unaware of her power, she becomes a tyrant, ever elusive, ever demanding. She promises love but offers addiction. She appears to give but she takes. And the man, believing he is being seduced by the outer woman, fails to see that it is his own Anima who is pulling the strings behind the veil. This dynamic becomes most visible when a man tries to break free. The moment he withholds, the moment he begins to discipline his erotic nature, he stirs the Anima into action. Suddenly, women seem more alluring. The world becomes rich with temptation. Opportunities for release present themselves in uncanny synchronicities. These are not coincidences. These are psychic echoes and manifestations of the inner feminine archetype trying to reclaim her grip on the man's soul. In myth, she is known by many names: Circe, who turns men into animals; the Sirens, who lure sailors into watery graves; Lilith, who refuses to submit and punishes those who resist her charms. But these figures are not anti-woman. They are depictions of the feminine force untamed and unconfronted within the psyche. When a man has not yet integrated his Anima, she appears in external women as either goddess or demon. He either worships her blindly or fears her deeply. In both cases, he is enslaved. Women in the physical realm are not the root of this seduction. They are vessels through which the Anima speaks, sometimes consciously, sometimes not. But for the man on the path of inner mastery, blaming women is an evasion. The real confrontation must happen within that. For as long as the Anima remains unconscious, she controls him. She knows his weaknesses, his fantasies, his unspoken desires. She knows how to disguise herself in the precise form that will make him fall. And when he does fall, when he breaks his retention, gives in to the pull, surrenders his essence, it is not the woman who has conquered him. It is his own inner feminine reminding him of her power and of the cost of trying to master her without understanding her first. Ego versus instinctual pull, the path of retention, is not merely a physical act of withholding. It is a confrontation between two ancient forces within the male psyche, the rational ego and the primordial instincts that rise from the depths. The ego, fragile and proud, believes itself to be sovereign. It sets goals, makes decisions, constructs identity. It declares, "I will retain." But deep beneath the ego lies something far older and less interested in declarations. A churning force that has shaped human behavior long before language was born. It is the instinctual pull rooted in survival, reproduction, and the continuation of life itself. To retain is to rebel, not against women nor against sexuality, but against nature's automaticity. And nature, when denied, does not yield quietly. It does not accept the ego's resistance as noble. Instead, it responds with intensity, heightened urges, obsessive thoughts, sudden waves of arousal that seem to come from nowhere. These are not random occurrences. They are the instinctual body testing the ego's resolve. The body does not want transcendence. It wants release. And the ego, if unfortified, becomes a pawn in this game of inner tension. The conflict is archetypal. On one side stands the ego, the symbol of the conscious man, builder of civilization, bearer of will. On the other side, the instincts, those unrelenting tides of desire that whisper of pleasure, propagation, and momentary escape. The tension between the two creates a crucible, a psychological furnace where something deeper can be born, if the man can endure it. But most do not because they are weak in the moral sense, but because they have underestimated the cunning force of the unconscious. The instincts do not argue with the ego. They seduce it. They present visions of release not as surrender, but as reward. They say, "You deserve this. It's natural. Adjust this once." The modern world, saturated with sexual imagery, is not merely a reflection of cultural decay. It is the outward manifestation of an internal imbalance. The collective unconscious now spills into the external world. Everywhere the instinctual pull is reinforced, algorithms feed it, advertisements exploit it, social platforms amplify it, and through it all, the ego becomes weaker, less centered, more fragmented. For the man who tries to stand still in this current, the pressure becomes immense. He is not fighting a single urge. He is resisting a culture, a history, an evolutionary program. Women in this context often serve as mirrors, not because they intend to, but because they embody the erotic principle in form. The feminine is instinctually charged, biologically designed to provoke reaction and movement in the masculine. This is not a moral judgment, it is a psychic law. And so, the man who seeks to retain must become aware, not just of the outer woman, but of the reaction she awakens within. Of the reaction she awakens within. That reaction is not simply attraction, it is the instinct pulling on the ego, challenging its illusion of control. The modern ego is particularly fragile, raised in comfort, distracted by endless novelty, and never forced to confront the wildness within. It lacks the strength to hold its ground. Retention exposes this weakness. It strips the ego of its masks and reveals how quickly it can be turned. The man says he will not release, and yet at the first sign of temptation, the body overrules him. The instincts are not evil. They are neutral. But their power is enormous, and unless the ego is trained to navigate them, it will always collapse. This is why retention is not simply a discipline. It is a psychological initiation. It is the ego facing its ancient rival, not in the arena of morals or oppression, but in the domain of raw inner reality. The instincts do not care about your intentions, they care about energy, and when that energy is withheld, they rise to reclaim it. The man must learn to transmute or be consumed, mate or be consumed. The tension between holding and releasing becomes the battlefield, and the outcome is not determined by willpower alone, but by integration, by whether the ego can withstand the pull without fracturing into chaos. The shadow of desire, in its purest form, is not evil. It is a natural flame, a psychic force that propels the individual toward union, toward creativity, toward transcendence. Yet when desire is not integrated, when it is split off, denied or hidden, it falls into the unconscious and takes on a darker form. It becomes shadow. The man no longer desires with clarity, he desires with obsession, with compulsion, with guilt and shame hidden beneath the surface. What once was sacred becomes distorted. The fire becomes smoke. The longing becomes lust. And in this transformation, the man begins to lose sight of himself. The shadow of desire does not wear a monstrous face. It wears beauty. It arrives clothed in attraction, in fantasy, in seduction. It speaks the language of pleasure but masks an ancient hunger, not for the woman herself, but for something lost within. When a man is drawn uncontrollably to a woman, when he cannot look away, when his mind races with possibilities and outcomes and fantasies, he is not simply responding to her outer form. He is being confronted by his own shadow, projected onto her body, wrapped in perfume and illusion. This projection is not conscious. It slips beneath awareness. The man tells himself he is in love, or at least drawn by something real, something powerful, but he does not see the depth of the reflection. The woman is not merely herself. She is a screen upon which his unconscious paints everything he has not yet faced. The need for validation, the fear of abandonment, the craving for nurture, the desire to be consumed. She becomes the embodiment of all he represses, and in chasing her, he is not chasing her soul, he is chasing his own missing pieces. This is the danger of the unexamined erotic instinct. Without inner work, desire becomes confused with possession. The man seeks to possess the woman, to conquer her, to be accepted by her, thinking that in doing so, he will be whole. But the wholeness he seeks cannot be found outside. It resides in the dark mirror of the self, in the confrontation with the repressed, the denied, the unloved parts of his own psyche. The woman who arouses his longing merely awakens the unhealed wound. When he retains his seed, he is forced to feel this more deeply. The energy that once dissipated through release now cycles inward. It lights up the dark corridors of the unconscious. It amplifies desire not as pleasure, but as revelation. Old fantasies surface, forgotten memories return, nightmares, dreams, and compulsions intensify. This is not failure. It is exposure. The unconscious is speaking, the shadow is rising, and the man who once believed he had control discovers he is filled with unseen forces. Women, again, are not the source of this darkness. They trigger it, mirror, reflect it, but they do not create it. The shadow was already there, buried beneath social masks and ego illusions. A glance from a woman, a touch, a smile. These do not implant desire in a man. They uncover it. They reveal its shape, its hunger, its unfinished business. And the more unaware he is of his own inner landscape, the more easily he is thrown off center. He blames her, or worships her, or fears her. He cannot simply see her. Because he is not truly seeing himself, the modern man is rarely taught to integrate his shadow. He is told to succeed, to perform, to please. His inner life is ignored. His darker impulses are labeled immoral or weak. So they go underground, growing in secrecy, gaining strength. And when they finally emerge, through temptation, obsession, or emotional collapse, they do so with ferocity. Semen retention becomes not just a test of will, but a revelation of shadow. The urges do not disappear. They grow louder. Not because the discipline is failing, but because it is working. The mask is cracking. The unconscious is responding. The shadow is revealing its true face, not to destroy the man, but to force him to reckon with the full spectrum of who he is. Psychic vampirism, there exists a subtle, often invisible dynamic between the masculine and feminine energies, one not grounded in reason, nor in the spoken word, but in energetic exchange. At its most distorted, this dynamic reveals itself as a form of psychic vampirism, where one draws upon the life force of the other, not through conscious malice, but through unconscious hunger. In this realm, semen is not merely a fluid, but a symbolic representation of masculine vitality, creative energy, willpower, spiritual potency. To drain it is not just to take something physical, but to siphon the very essence of a man's psychic structure. Certain women, often unaware of the deeper mechanisms at play, carry within them a void, a psychic hollowness shaped by their own traumas, unmet emotional needs, or unconscious identification with a devouring feminine archetype. These women do not seek connection in the sacred sense. They seek energy. They crave attention, arousal, emotional obsession, and above all, access to the man's unguarded essence. They do not come to give, only to take. And yet they often present themselves not as predators, but as helpless, wounded, alluring, or insatiably desirable. To the man who has not cultivated inner clarity, these women appear as gifts, dangerous perhaps, but irresistible. He feels chosen, wanted, intoxicated by the invitation. But he does not see that what is being stirred within him is not love, nor even lust, but a regression into an unconscious contract. She will give him the illusion of intimacy, and in return, he will give her his energy. Whether through sexual release, emotional fixation, or endless attention, the trade is completed in silence. And afterward he feels depleted, not just physically but psychically, hollowed out as if something essential has been quietly taken. The archetype behind this dynamic has long been known in mythology. She is the succubus, the siren, the witch who offers pleasure at the price of the soul. In modern terms, she may appear in the form of the emotionally manipulative partner, the seductive stranger, or the woman who thrives on being desired, but never truly gives herself. Her power is not in her body, but in her ability to magnetize masculine attention, to awaken longing, and then feed off the energy it creates. Her strength lies in the man's unconsciousness, his inability to see beyond the surface of beauty, beyond the chemical rush of arousal, into the energetic undercurrent pulling him downward. What makes this form of vampirism so difficult to detect is its ambiguity. It does not always involve physical sex. A glance, a suggestive tone, a breadcrumb of emotional intimacy, these are enough to activate the masculine energetic system, to stir the primal forces that live beneath the ego. And once stirred, if not consciously contained, they begin to leak through fantasy, through neediness, through compulsive behavior. The man believes he is acting of his own will, but in truth, his psychic energy is being harvested by an unconscious archetype operating through another. This dynamic is not about gender in the biological sense. It is the dance between the active and passive forces of the psyche. In the man, when the inner masculine principle is weak, when he lacks discipline, awareness, or self-containment, he becomes vulnerable to invasion. The woman becomes a portal through which his energy escapes. She may not intend harm, but her unconscious needs create a gravitational pull, one that only affects those who are not rooted within themselves. The man who has not established inner boundaries finds himself entangled, drained, and confused, wondering why a single encounter leaves him spiritually empty. Energy exchange is inevitable in any interaction, but it becomes vampiric when it is one-sided. When there is no reciprocity, no reverence, no shared growth. The man gives, not from love, but from compulsion. The woman receives, not from openness, but from inner emptiness. What appears as intimacy is often extraction. And in this imbalance, the man is left weaker, more fragmented, less connected to his inner source. Semen retention then becomes more than abstinence. It becomes a shield against the subtle harvesting of energy that occurs when the unconscious feminine meets the unguarded masculine. There is a great illusion that seduction comes from the outside, that it is the woman, her body, her voice, her scent, who captures the man and draws him into weakness. But this is only the surface drama. The true battle does not begin when he meets her. It begins long before, in the quiet hidden chambers of his inner world. The war is not between man and woman. It is between fragments of himself, between his higher aim and his lower pull, between the part of him that longs to rise and the part that is terrified of what rising will cost. This is the war within. Semen retention acts as the ignition of this war. It appears to be a simple decision, to hold, to contain, to master. But that decision destabilizes the inner system. Forces that once lay dormant now awaken. The unconscious, no longer fed by its usual gratification, begins to resist. Cravings emerge not just from the body, but from the psyche. Become charged. Temptations intensify. The man begins to feel as though he is under attack, but what he is really experiencing is the uprising of his inner chaos, chaos that has always been there, masked by comfort and indulgence. And for comfort and indulgence. Within this chaos are archetypes, inner characters, each with their own desires. There is the inner child who longs to be loved unconditionally, to be touched and soothed. There is the adolescent rebel who hates rules and seeks the thrill of release. There is the inner addict whispering that just one time won't hurt. And there is the voice of the false lover who tells him that pleasure is healing, that to deny desire is to deny life. These voices do not speak loudly, but they speak constantly. They undermine the ego's command. They sabotage from within, and then the outer world, the mirror appears. The woman, often unknowingly, becomes the externalized image of his inner conflict. Her gaze awakens something ancient in him. Her presence speaks directly to the unconscious. She becomes both goddess and destroyer. She does not need to say much. She merely needs to be. And in her being, the man feels the splitting of his own psyche. Part of him wants to hold, to protect his energy, to remain anchored in purpose. The other part wants to dissolve, to be taken, to abandon the struggle, and sink into softness. This is the nature of the inner war. It is not won with brute force or suppression. It cannot be won by hating the woman or fleeing from her, for she is only a reflection. She brings form to what he has not yet faced in himself. The tension he feels in her presence is the pressure of his own fragmentation, the parts of him that do not yet serve the self, the true center of his being. And until he integrates these parts, until he makes peace with the child, the rebel, the addict, and the false lover, he will continue to be ruled by them. He may go for days, weeks, even months retaining, but without integration, retention becomes a brittle wall, easily shattered by a single moment of unconsciousness. True strength arises not from resistance alone, but from awareness, from knowing the terrain of his own psyche. From recognizing the triggers not as enemies, but as invitations to depth. Every temptation is a message. Every longing is a map. The feminine presence does not attack him. She awakens him. She shows him where he is not yet whole. When he finds himself drawn to her, when his thoughts spiral, when his body trembles with desire, he is not being pulled outward, he is being pulled inward. The battle is internal. It is between the part of him that wants comfort and the part that wants transformation. Between the lower instinct that seeks release and the higher aim that seeks meaning. Between the man he has been and the man he is becoming. And until he recognizes this battlefield within, he will misread every woman as seductress, every urge as betrayal, every failure as weakness, never realizing that it is not the woman who is testing him, but his own soul. There is a mystery few men are initiated into, that the same force which drives them toward physical release, toward lust, toward the trembling edge of surrender, is the very force that, if harnessed, can illuminate their mind, forge their character, and awaken their soul. What most experience only as sexual urge is, in truth, undifferentiated psychic energy, raw, chaotic, primal, capable of destruction or creation, depending on how it is carried. In its unconscious state, it pulls downward, into the body, into fantasy, into compulsive repetition. But when confronted with awareness, when met with containment and direction, it begins to rise, it becomes fuel, it becomes fire. This is transmutation. In the old traditions, alchemical, yogic, esoteric, this process was never merely symbolic. The seed was understood as sacred. Not just biologically, but spiritually. It carried within it the full potential of life, not only to create another being, but to regenerate the man himself. In the seed was encoded not just future generations, but the blueprint of transformation. To spill it aimlessly was to squander something divine. To retain it, to move with it consciously, was to undergo inner alchemy, a shift from the lower centers to the higher, from instinct to insight, from compulsion to vision. But this transmutation does not occur automatically. It demands intention. It demands suffering. The energy must be contained, not repressed but observed. Held as one holds a flame in bare hands, the heat will rise. Fantasies will claw at the mind. The body will rebel. Night after night, dreams may erupt with the wildness of unspent desire. And yet if the man endures, not through denial, but through presence, the energy begins to change. It climbs the spine. It sharpens thought. It deepens intuition. The man begins to see differently, speak differently, walk differently. Something in him that was once dissipated begins to consolidate. But this ascent cannot happen in a man who still sees the feminine as object. If woman remains, in his eyes, merely a vehicle for gratification, something to possess, to conquer, to extract pleasure from, then the energy will never move beyond the pelvis. It will stay trapped in repetition, in cycles of craving and regret. Transmutation begins not just with retention, but with reverence. Not blind worship, but conscious honoring. For feminine outside, yes, but more importantly, of the feminine within. For the energy a man seeks to transmute is not merely sexual, it is relational. It is his response to beauty, to closeness, to tenderness. If he resists it with fear, he becomes rigid. If he surrenders to it blindly, he becomes enslaved. But if he enters into relationship with it, if he dialogues with it, listens to it, learns from it, it begins to speak a deeper language. It tells him where he is still fragmented, where he uses pleasure to avoid pain, where he seeks the mother in the lover or the savior in the seductress. And through this seeing, the energy refines. What was once a gnawing urge becomes a creative impulse. The same force that once drove him to the edge of his control now drives him to build, to write, to lead, to serve. He does not lose his desire, he expands it. It no longer ends in the moment of climax. It stretches into his work, his presence, his purpose. He becomes magnetic, not because he chases, but because he emanates. His very being begins to carry charge. Transmutation is not the suppression of the erotic, it is its sanctification. The erotic in its highest form is not about sex, it is about life. It is the movement of energy toward union, within the self, with the world, with the divine. To hold one's seed is to declare that one is not merely a body, not merely a machine of pleasure and release, but a vessel of potential, a temple, a crucible, a storm waiting to be shaped into lightning.